762-506. No, that wasn't it. 1001140. No, that wasn't it either. Man, I always forget the codes for things like this. Hey everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, bringing you another book to decide. Is it worth reading of a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? So let's decide. The Arctic Code is a middle-grade adventure novel written by Matthew J. Kirby and published on April 29, 2015. It was the first book in the Dark Gravity Sequence trilogy, which was followed by The Island of the Sun and ending with The Rogue Planet. I couldn't find much on the book itself to be said, at least in terms of background, so I'll put up what I call the report card and let's show you how it's relatively well received throughout the world. Then we move on to where we always start, the cover. Now the cover for this thing is decent. It shows three kids sitting in what is we know now is a crevice of ice, as the one in the lead, who we know should probably be Eleanor Perry, turns to see two wolves advancing on her. Now the two kids in this book are other characters that are introduced named Julian and Finn, with what I assume to be, honestly, there's no difference between the two in this picture. So one of them is glancing back with Eleanor as they recognize the wolves, while the other seems to be enraptured by a glowing light at the very end of the crevice. And if you look carefully around it, you can see what looks like the ancient remains of a deserted village. Just on the superficial level, this is a very interesting cover. It promises action, but also mystery and something that's strange that's going on. And to be perfectly honest, this is a middle school book, so honestly, the cover not necessarily being completely accurate is perfectly fine, because on the surface, it's very interesting. It was good enough that I picked it up and wanted to read it. My only complaints would mostly be it's just not very accurate to what happens in the book. But to go more into that would be to involve spoilers. So I'm mostly going to leave it at that because, again, that's a super minor nitpick. Now, on the back is just a small little excerpt from the book. So there's really not much there. The synopsis, like everything with the dust cover, is actually on the inside. Now, I read this on my TBR. If you want me to see it read, go check it out. But if I had one big complaint about the cover, it's this synopsis here. You see, the synopsis is mostly accurate. However, it ruins a really big reveal later on in the book. Now, for those of you who see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But that is one of those things that is like, okay, you should have nixed that or been a bit more vague. Because with that in mind, it became very obvious what it was building up to. And the reveal was very lackluster because of it. Now, let's move on to the synopsis. The synopsis of this book is fairly easy. It's a middle school book. Basically, the world is undergoing what it's called the freeze. And that's basically out of nowhere, a second ice age has hit the planet and is slowly creeping from, I guess, one of the poles to the equator. Now, because humans aren't built to live in sub-zero temperature, everyone is kind of fleeing to the equator, which, while it's still frozen, is at least still above freezing on good days. Now, Eleanor Perry is one of these people that had already lived in this area, specifically Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Eleanor Perry is a smart but weird little girl compared to most of her classmates in the sense that she likes to do daring and adventurous things, but is also really smart and is able to basically figure her way into trouble that wouldn't normally be there. This comes from her mother, who's a climatologist who's currently attempting to find natural resources for the world to burn and to generate energy, because there's a massive energy crisis going on due to the amount of heating that is needed constantly. Out of nowhere, Eleanor gets a bunch of cryptic messages and files from her mother with only one warning: don't show anyone. after that, her mother goes missing in the news. And the GET, which is the Global Energy Trust, a giant corporation which is responsible for almost the entire world's energy at this rate, suddenly wants to see the device that her mother sent all the files to, claiming it'll help find her mother, but Eleanor seems to know better. So with that in mind, she decides to run away from Phoenix, Arizona, fleeing to the Arctic where her mother went missing, well, specifically Barrow, Alaska, as a starting point. Going to Barrow, Alaska, to find her mother and figure out what all this means. So with that, let's talk about the book proper. Now, for the most part, I actually really liked this book. This book had a really interesting protagonist. For the most part, this book was surprisingly good, especially for a kid's book. It avoids falling into those traps that I mentioned kids' books have a habit of falling into. One such trap is the complete lack of danger that tends to come with kids' books, because the author is afraid to really make the protagonist seem like they're in danger, because he doesn't want to scare his audience, which are kids. And this book definitely avoids that one most of all. The book is very well written with the idea, yes, Eleanor is a 12-year-old girl going to a place that's constantly below freezing, filled with rough people. And the book does not sugarcoat the fact that, one, that is not very smart, and two, she's in a lot of danger at all times. She almost freezes to death several times. She's almost kidnapped the moment she gets to Alaska. And there's just a whole bunch of different things that's like, you actually feel like Eleanor is in danger as opposed to normal kids' books. There was always that feeling no one's really in danger that's a good guy. Like I mentioned with Grey Griffins. Like how anytime they were in any sort of danger, it wouldn't last very long before a Deus Ex Machina would come out of nowhere. And while there is these moments in this book, every one of those plot armor scenes, for the most part, there's a couple that is a bit pushing it, but every one of those plot armor scenes are well built up to and established before they happen. It's not like a truck comes out of nowhere and hits the guy trying to kidnap her. That's kind of what I mean when I say Deus Ex Machina and bad plot armor. It's one of those, it wasn't built up to, it just came out of nowhere because you need to get the protagonist out of trouble. There's also legitimate moral debates in this book that I'm not sure if the author entirely meant it to be more gray as it is, but as an adult you kind of appreciate that there's no easy answer in this book as opposed to what it would normally be for kids' book, which is very black and white. There's actually very much, neither option is good, but one option feels better than the other. So we're going to go with that. Such as the fact that one of the big issues is fighting over this energy source that has been found because they don't know what it does, and one side wants to try to use all the energy while very heavily risking the Earth, while the other side wants to study it more and basically find a way to shut it off and figure out what it is before they start using that energy, which also puts the Earth at risk because, they need energy to heat things. And there's another with the fight that goes on, but that's dipping a bit more into spoilers. There will be a few spoilers later, but it's required to talk about. Just fair warning. Now, when it comes to the characters of the book, though, it's kind of flip-floppy. I personally loved Eleanor as a character, but as I mentioned, she's resourceful, daring, and very smart. At least at first. One of the downsides as the book went on is Eleanor sort of loses bits of her personality, and they don't really make an appearance in any significant way. The book literally starts with her creating a homemade snow machine so she can create ramps to sled down a construction site. And, that sets up that she's smart, she knows how to make things with minimal stuff, except even by the end of the book, she never does anything with that. She never has these bright moments or these smart moments where she realizes something no one else does. In fact, I'm not going to lie to you guys, out of nowhere they include this sort of psychic subplot for her. That this energy source I was talking about earlier is psychically connected to her, and that's how she figures it out. Not because she was smart and resourceful, but because it told her what it was. One thing I do like, though, is that the villain is actually fairly interesting. He's not just a bland villain like a lot of kids in YA novels do. He's not just evil for the sake of evil. Yes, he's evil, obviously. He's greedy and selfish and is willing to hurt people to get what he wants. But his motivation goes beyond the evil. He basically, his main motivation is to do whatever it takes to make sure humanity survives as a whole. And even if that means only a small subsection of humanity survives over the rest. And that's a very interesting, that's at least an interesting motivation for a character to have that a lot of bad guys in these kind of books don't. There's a couple more protagonists. Finn and Julian Powers, like I mentioned in the cover, are the sons of the other scientist that goes missing with Eleanor Perry, or Eleanor Perry's mom. At first, it seems like they're going to be pretty relevant. The kind of same situation as Eleanor's in, and one is smart like Eleanor, but one is older, wiser, and generally more skeptical of some of the more outlandish stuff. So you think he'd be the good balancing act, but no. After a certain point, they just fade so heavily into the background, you kind of forget they exist at times. And the same kind of applies to their dad, Simon Powers, I believe he's called. But the dad, the one who went missing with Eleanor's mom, also doesn't feel like he really should have been there. He feels like maybe at one point there was a reason he was there, but somewhere between the drafts, his reason got dropped completely. So he's just kind of a relic. He's there because he was there, but the author didn't really have any idea what to do with him beyond being a slightly opposing opinion to Eleanor's mom during one of the debates. And even then, it's not significant enough to really mention. So yeah, like I said, it's kind of flip-floppy. There are characters that are good in this book, but even the good characters sometimes end up just the author doesn't feel like he had anything to do with them at a certain point, so he just forgot they existed. And it's just, Now the story itself, again, this is where the spoilers are, so if you want to skip this, I don't know, I'll put a time code down if I remember it. Now the story itself is fairly interesting. It mixes intrigue and fast-paced action pretty well. The book constantly feels like it's moving no matter where you are in the story, and that's very nice, especially for a middle school book. And while the story overall I felt was decent, there are some things I feel really dragged down, to be completely honest. Like I mentioned earlier, the synopsis really does spoil one of the big reveals of the book. And that is, again, spoilers, aliens are involved. And I say that's a big reveal because it's really built up to. They're trying to figure out what this machine is, why it's doing this, what this strange thing in orbit around the planet is, and it's like all of that could have worked to build a very satisfying mystery and reveal, but if you read the synopsis before you went into this book, you already know aliens. And trust me when I say that one little hint tells you everything you need to know about this book. If you go into that knowing that it's aliens or out of this world, you can guess all the twists afterwards. But there's also small little story decisions I just personally don't get why they were made. Now, again, this is another spoiler, but the machine that the aliens are using to basically steal Earth's power, that's what the twist is called the concentrator. And the concentrator, when it's first activated, revives a tribe of cavemen that they deal with. And it's just one of those, while a cool idea, one, why? The cavemen aren't really needed. In fact, beyond a small element of being willing to fight for your home even against overwhelming odds, there's really no reason they should be cavemen. Like, this whole plotline would have worked just as well if it was, say, a small town that had been built on top of this and they realized, like, say, the concentrator warmed the area around them, giving them this small little biosphere they lived in. I suppose it would make them seem more selfish, but it's just one of those, again, I don't understand why cavemen. 2, it doesn't ever explain why the concentrator somehow revived tens of thousand years old corpses. Like, legitimately, that's one of those things that's like, no, you probably should have explained that. Don't leave that mystery for another book, because the cavemen at the end of this book go away. They probably will show up in the other books, but for now, there's the big question, why did it revive them? It doesn't make sense. Because what this thing is effectively an energy siphon. So why is it reviving things that are dead? The more you think about it, the more it just kind of hurts to think about. Honestly, to be perfectly fair, the last third of the book was very disappointing compared to the following 2/3 of the book. Like I mentioned, Eleanor is resourceful, daring, smart nature completely disappears after a certain point, or at least the intelligent and resourceful part. She just kind of ends up being daring. In fact, like I said, she makes stupid decisions that's like, I don't see the character we started with making these decisions, or not catching these small little hints at something. Because there's that one point where the bad guys trick her into revealing something, and despite someone mentioning a bit of information that would outright say, wait a minute, how did that happen that would basically reveal the bad guys had tricked her, she completely ignores it until it's spelled out for her. Which doesn't make sense, again, for the character we were introduced at the beginning. There's also no hint of her resourcefulness playing a part in the plot. But again, the last third of the book, it was very rushed. It just felt like Kirby realized, I need to do a final climactic act that has action and stuff, but didn't really think through it very well. It's rushed. These cavemen that I mentioned about try to take on this massive walking research station with a whole bunch of guns and armor and stuff, and for some reason it's considered brave and daring and smart to fight back, even though Eleanor's mom has a very good point that they have guns, but it's also at this point where the author starts very poorly explaining stuff. There's a couple times where I had to go back and reread a section because I'm like, wait a minute, did I miss something? And then no, I went back and just said, no, okay, so that's what that meant. It was just very poorly explained. Like I said, it feels very rushed. The walking research station, at one point, at the climax, it basically collapses in the ice and gets destroyed. However, it's such a blink and you miss it kind of moment that at the end, when they're all huddling around trying not to freeze to death, you're thinking, okay, why don't they just go into the research station? And you have to reread like, oh, I guess it destroyed itself. Okay, I guess that makes sense. I would have drawn a little more attention to that rather than you could have missed it by skipping a line or two. Overall, I would say the book is a 7 out of 10. This is one of those books where I'm glad I decided to go with the 1 out of 10 rating system instead of the more standard 1 out of 5. Because this is a book that falls, if I was doing a 1 out of 5, this is a book that would fall perfectly at 3.5. It's not really bad enough to be a 3, but it's nowhere near good, and it's not good enough to be a 4 either. It's very much a 3.5 or 7. It's good, and I would definitely recommend any juvenile readers on my channel pick this up if you're looking for anything interesting. However, older audiences or more mature ones, I would probably say maybe give this a pass. It's not necessarily that riveting, and again, you just probably won't find much worth reading within this book after a certain point. It's good, it's written well, but it's not really for you. It's definitely among the better juvenile novels I've read on this channel. Like, apparently, remember, Night Flight's supposed to be a kid's book, so... But it does have quite a few issues, all things considered. You know, all this reading about cavemen barbarians and aliens and frozen tundras that are unforgiving for man has really got me in a certain mood. I kind of want to read more about it, but I've already finished that book. But you know what? I cannot put it past me. I just want to read some more about some ice planet barbarians. But until then, remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure's worth having, even the bad ones. Hey guys, just putting this out here, just reminding everyone that I'm currently having a giveaway on my channel. I'm giving away Beacon 23, a book that was my 2021 book of the year. This was to celebrate my 100th subscriber goal, and I wanted to just give back to you guys a little bit. It's still going on until December 21st. The winners of the drawing will be announced on December 21st. The first person to win will receive a hardcover edition of the book, and the second person will receive the paperback version of the book. If these interest you, check out the 100 sub special where I talk about the synopsis, and be sure to leave a comment saying you want to be into the giveaway, as well as commenting your book of 2021. With that, have a good day.